Welcome to the Movement Podcast. This show is all about movement, giving you a better idea of how you can optimize the human body to be the best it can be.
Hey, thanks for joining me. I'm Lee Burton. I'm here with Cook, and welcome to the Movement Podcast. And we want to talk today about a topic that I think we all can wrap our heads around, but we're going to dive and maybe take a little bit different approach, and that's wellness. And what's the state of wellness today? And I think the first thing we need to do, Gray, is define wellness.
Well, number one, I sort of have a little bit of how can I say this? I go into attack mode because early in our career,
Hold on. I'm going to back you up a second.
All right.
Define wellness. You've defined wellness for me in your own unique way.
Okay.
Because if we go Google wellness, it's going to give us a definition. How do you look at wellness?
How many risk factors you don't have?
Say that again. What do you mean by that?
Well, a risk factor means it's a measurable quantity or quality in you that's associated with future harm. Meaning, so when you have metabolic syndrome, you have checked all the boxes of cholesterol, obesity, blood sugar issues, blood pressure. You've checked all those boxes. It doesn't mean you're going to have a heart attack, but the chances of you seeing your late 80s without a cardiovascular incident are not likely.
So when most of us, when we look at or think about risk factors, we think of them as things that are bad.
Yeah.
It's a thing that you had that is bad.
Yeah.
And we think of it in the cardiovascular metabolic area. Heart attack, cardiovascular disease. What are those risk factors? Smoking, diet, exercise. Those are the things we consider. When we talk about wellness, what you're saying is, okay, how many of those risk factors do you not have?
Exactly. So that's the best way to say it, because that's the way I came at functional movement. How many movement dysfunctions don't you have before we start talking about your rehab? Because I can have 2 back patients in my waiting room. One has every risk factor possible: poor balance, poor flexibility, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular issues, obesity, and really no concept of exercise or diet. I got another triathlete that actually pushed a little hard in a race and lit up their low back. They both checked 7 out of 10 on low back pain, and they both have the same insurance code. But
Right.
Those aren't the same patient to me, but they are the exact same patient to a pharmacist and a doctor many times.
And all of us none of us are walking around with 0 risk factors. We all have a little bit of baggage. It's really a question of how much baggage do you have?
It is, Lee, and I understand that when we start talking risk factors and you confront people, athletes, people trying to lose weight, whatever your thing is, when you start doing this checklist of risk factors, it's pretty personal and it hurts. But here's the thing: if I'm your accountant, I don't care why you got in debt. You could have had all of your money embezzled from you. You could have gone through a divorce and left all the money on the line just to get custody of your kids. There's no judgment here. You're in debt either way. And I got to get debt consolidation in a direction for you, or you're going to be in debt the rest of your life. I mean, credit card companies are built on that. It's going to be okay. No, it's not. 18% interest is not going to be okay. And so that compounding debt is just like a compounding asset. The more years you're on this planet carrying risk factors, the worse it gets, because now the word syndrome it comes from the Latin, things run together. So metabolic syndrome, these things run together. And if you go to the very upstream cause of all of the things you can tick on your way to a heart attack, the very first one is problems with your insulin, which is right back to RFK's mission. We got to get this crap out of our food. High fructose corn syrup was invented to basically get you addicted and save them money at the exact same time.
Right. And I think the one thing that also should be brought up, because, we can't sit here and just be 2 old guys like the Muppet guys that they're sitting at the thing bitching about everything. But at the end of the day, it is a snapshot in time. Now, if you've got, some, issues with your genetics, and, your family has a history of cardiovascular disease or obesity or diabetes, you may have that, you may check that box. But it's a snapshot in time, meaning that it doesn't always have to be that way. It's going to fluctuate. And if I know that I have a history of cardiovascular disease in my family, then I've got to make sure that I keep out all the other risk factors. I shouldn't smoke. I got to keep a little bit more awareness of my diet, my exercise, knowing that I've got that little box checked. So when I say snapshot in time, with us being the screen guys, just because I screen you today and you do well doesn't mean you're going to do that way a month from now, and vice versa.
That's right. Your screen can change with a pretty bad injury, or your screen can change slow over time simply by not confronting the physical stress that would keep you healthy. So I honestly think that when we go to risk factors, and listen, I do way better one-on-one with a patient, really telling them part of this is on me, but there's a bigger part on you. I'm with you 1 hour, 3 times a week. You're with you the rest of the time. You can easily undo what I'm doing. However, if we work together and you start changing some of your habits and self-care, behavior modification, we're going to get through this thing. And I do have, I think, a lot more success. But when I'm talking to an audience, I know everybody I'm speaking to is thinking, not me. And then you and I pulled that stunt last year at 3 different conferences we went to where everybody in the audience is us. They have our credentials. They are fitness, rehab, sports medicine, performance specialists. And they have the exact same risk factors as the people they're trying to help. So
and in some cases, worse.
Yeah. I think that most adults are probably going to have broken sleep, and most pre-adults are going to have broken nutrition. It doesn't mean that the adults don't have broken nutrition too, but if you're really going to help the youth, there's a good chance if they're active, they might be getting enough sleep, but we know the diet is bad. We've done the college surveys. We've done the whole thing. So.
Well, we developed something that some of you all may or may not be familiar with, and that's something called the functional wellness screen. And I think that's how we look at wellness right now in our world, and how we approach things. And that is taking the things that we know matter the most as relates to wellness. And that's your sleep, that's nutrition, your diet, your behavioral health.
Yep.
Obviously your movement, your physical activity. Are you exercising? We need to know a little bit about you, about your history of injury and what you're coming to the table with.
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately we want to make recommendations, and then we do a breathing screen, and when we call that functional wellness, and I would argue that is really what wellness is. Now the more traditional model of wellness looks at financial situations, because if your finances aren't in order, that drives stress. If
your relationships aren't in order, that drives stress.
So that, and then spiritual, a lot of these other things, but it's still lifestyle, behavioral health, lifestyle. These are things that we do. But we put that word function on top of it. All right, let's take a quick break here to tell you about Simeo. Simeo is our holistic wellness platform designed to give you the tools and resources to assess, manage, and improve your clients' and patients' overall health and wellness. Go to Simeo.com to sign up for a free trial today. That's SYMMIO.com.
We got 2 new courses I think you'll like. One's a deep dive on mobility and one's a deep dive on stability. We really unpack that and show you how simple single corrective exercises aren't nearly as good as a meal of mobility assembled in a flow, in a set of stations. Do the same thing for stability. It's sort of a new way of looking at things, but it's that same old functional approach, just with nice packages that actually give you huge dividends.
Why?
And function to me, academically speaking, means good enough, right? When you're looking at a used car, it'll say everything functions as it should. Okay, I know it's not new, but you just said it ain't broken, so it is as it is. But yet, the temperature's good, the oil pressure's good, the tire pressure's good, fluids are topped off. I mean, it's as functional as it can be. And the funny thing is, most people, and we do a lot of stuff with health, safety, first responders, and military, their equipment is in way better order than they are. There are mandates about that fire truck and about that firearm that you're working with, that it will be cleaned, it will be maintained, it will be functioning, and it will be tested, right? But we start testing human beings, we run into policy, procedure, and politics because it seems like we're discriminating. And if we're protecting you from your own blind spot, how's that discriminating? I mean, it is what it is, but I honestly feel way safer as a consultant than the people who have to implement what we tell them, because you're working with a group of people that literally at scale is not going to be present as much as you need them to be. And your budget is going to be hurt by their sick days and their injuries. And most of them are preventable because they're not in a state of readiness that their equipment is.
So one thing that prompted us to do this, topic today was some data that we stumbled upon in the military. Well, National Guard. And it really,
we had those guys come here. They were asking us those direct questions, but this study
where you almost have 70% of the National Guard and Reserve are overweight or obese.
And just overweight and obese is not only a metabolic risk factor, it has distinguished itself as a movement risk factor. And I'm not saying you're so big you can't get through your functional movement patterns. What I'm saying is getting that big, you lost a lot of function on the way. So,
well, and think about that statistic, and it carries over, not to this degree, into the Army, Navy, the other armed services. National Guard is just a little bit more kind of, in your face because it is pretty high.
What's a cross section of us?
It's a cross section because really, okay, if it's almost 70%, 68% is what the data says. The average population, I think, is just over 70%.
Yes.
So you're not talking about that big, maybe 4 or 5% from the National Guard to the average population. So we're talking that is a major issue, and we all know all the ramifications that come along with being obese. It leads to all other types of issues, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, all of that. But I think if we're going to really kind of even strip down let's just take it the National Guard because I got the data in front of me. That's one of the things that disqualifies you from being a guardsman. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but being a guardsman.
Yep.
So who's getting in? What they have to do now is lower the standards.
They lower the standards, which makes you question the fact from a principle-based thing. Why were the standards there in the first place? Well, to protect you and the organization, right? If you're on the payroll and you're not performing, the organization is soon going to fail, right? And if we put you in harm's way and could have prevented it, then we didn't prepare you for the job. And what I think the military is experiencing across the board, whether it be in a reserve or whether it be in active duty, is that we don't have enough people to serve that meet the standard. So obviously we lower the standard. But what if we did that with your drinking water, Lee?
Right.
Right. What if we did that with your sewage and electricity and your internet connection? We just lower the standards, but we can serve more people. Yeah, but it's not reliable or consistent. Well,
I do see the data right here is approximately in the active military right now, it's approximately 70%. So I was thinking it'd be a little lower, but flip the page over and sure enough, approximately 70% are overweight or obese in the active military.
Let me make one statement because you mentioned this wellness screen we did. We do it in app form. It's one of the starting points that I try to get most of my athletes and patients to do because it simply gives me a map of where they've been and where they're headed if they don't change. When we do somebody's body mass index or waist to hip ratio and identify that somebody is overweight, we don't go directly for that because we go to their breathing screen, their movement screen, their sleep screen, and their nutritional awareness screen. And if things are broken there, I give you a free pass, man. I can understand why you have low energy. I can understand why it's not comfortable exercise. I can understand why you got sleep apnea, right? But most people get the CPAP before they try to drop 20 pounds. And the CPAP is that, vacuum cleaner you stick on your face every night that literally forces air into you that you should normally be pulling in and out with your own muscles asleep or awake. I've been there. I had the sleep apnea surgery. So I'm not speaking from a person who hasn't had all the risk factors I'm attacking. I wish I'd had an opportunity to have the data that we present now presented in front of me in my 20s. And if I didn't listen, I'd like to see it again in my 30s, and I'd like to see it in my 40s because eventually I got to a place in my late 40s and early 50s where I'm like, I don't want to be. I was probably 30 pounds heavier than I am now. And I was carrying it okay, but I didn't want to be that size in my 60s because I know it's not all muscle anymore.
Right.
So.
Well, I think the one thing we really try to focus on, and you just kind of alluded to it when you said, I wish I would have seen that data. That's the first step, is presenting that data to the individual, to the group, to the organization. Say, here's the state, as we started this off, the state of your organization or your wellness. That's the first step, because everything we're really talking about, even movement's a behavior. It's behavioral change. The first step to make behavioral change is becoming aware of where you are.
And that is my point, because let's be honest, the pharmaceutical company is going to capitalize on that. So the reason I said we're going to attack your self-care behaviors, what does the pharmaceutical company do? We've got a shot that helps you not be fat. They go right for the obesity and overweight and not the behaviors that get you there. And have you ever seen an athlete that got so injured and broken that they had to quit training and playing and they put on a lot of weight? Okay, this is not an unmotivated person. They played at a professional level, but then their lifestyle changed. Now, I've also seen people literally eat like a bird and not be able to lose weight. But when you look at their sleep and breathing, you understand, oh, I get it. So there are so many different ways that you can get heavier than you need to be. Only one is eating too much and not doing enough. But having chronic pain, having sleep disorders, being a shallow breather with a high acid profile. I mean, there are so many different things. So there's an olive branch here. All you got to do is not buy into the general recommendations and specifically find out where you are, because every podcast, every fitness guru, every wellness guru has this list of, well, what do they say? Eat right and exercise.
Right.
Or what's right. And they don't say eat right and exercise right. They just say eat right and move your ass around a little bit. Well, you and I realize that if you have a lot of movement risk factors, a general exercise program will create an orthopedic issue before it creates a metabolic dent in your weight.
We've got a lot of data. I mean, at this point, almost 10,000 data pieces of people that have gone through our functional wellness assessment, which is a self-assessment. And in the first responder community, sleep is a major problem. And, behavioral health is kind of in there. And then movement problems are kind of the top three things. Sleep's far and away a big problem. And now, what do? What's the typical response? Oh, we got to fix sleep. So they dedicate all this energy and resources to try to improve sleep. But what they're missing, and you just kind of alluded to that, is that first responder population, 30% self-report pain during movement, another 5% self-report just general pain. And so you're talking about 35 to 40% are saying they are in pain. Now, if they're saying they're in pain, how is that going to impact their sleep?
It's going to break their sleep. And I literally went about 6 years of my life not seeing 5 hours of sleep in a full night. And it's not because I didn't have the opportunity, and it's not because I was working third shift or I was a first responder. Pain would usually wake me up before I completed a sleep cycle. Now, that I didn't get a solution for that pain right away. I had a pretty complicated neck surgery and a few other things. But I could take a nap, right? There's not a fire every minute of the day. Sometimes I know it's frowned upon, right? You're a teenager, your dad catches you napping, you get your butt up, but I'm
Try
almost
to make it up when you can.
Right. So there are so many.
But the point with me bringing up pain is that's not being considered.
No, not at all.
It's not being considered, and that is the low-hanging fruit in a lot of these individuals. Well, I'm not sitting there saying they've got to go to the doctor and get evaluated, but they need to understand that that is an underlying issue that if it's not addressed, the data is pretty clear. If it's not addressed, you're going to have a bigger issue at some point.
And if you already got a musculoskeletal problem, an orthopedic issue, a pain, a post-surgical event, I can promise you that an inflammatory diet and substandard sleep is going to compound that and probably make it 50% worse than it is. Okay? It's not going to, eating right and sleeping is not going to make your knee arthritis go away. But it actually gives me a window of opportunity with better metabolism to see if you can heal on your own or see if we need to replace that joint. But most people go into total joint surgery overweight, sleep deprived, under-exercised, and ill-advised.
So what you just referenced right there is the person's state of wellness going into a surgery is already poor.
Yeah.
So why would you expect that person to have a successful outcome? Now, the outcome for the surgery will be great. The surgeon will get in there and they'll be the carpenter and they'll put the total knee in there. But if the person still continues down the path of adding to now that's an additional risk factor.
Yeah.
Now they've got a surgery.
Yeah, if you're not healthy enough, I mean, if you're going to die on the table, they won't usually do surgery on you. But how well are you on the table? And, I'm not just saying this to be an advocate for physical therapy, because I think a lot of physical therapists waste time on protocols instead of individualizing the thing. And I did it myself and realized I need a higher success rate in that if I'm going to be good at this. But how many people consider 4 weeks of physical therapy pre-surgical, even if you don't avoid the surgery, if you can go into the surgery with 2 less risk factors or significantly better balance and flexibility, your rehab's going to be better.
To me, that's the shift that as professionals, especially I would say clinicians, has to start owning. If you can't just look at the knee that you've got to rehab, or even regional interdependence and okay, the hip or the ankle, we have to think about the entire body, making sure they are functionally as well as possible. And that includes sleep, hydration, nutrition, all the factors that we've got to bring in to this case and not just say, here are the handful of exercises you need to do.
Had a conversation yesterday with one of my roommates from college. It's a physician now. He's in Virginia Beach, and he finally had a rotator cuff surgery he'd been putting off. He likes rock climbing. Physical therapist across the street, somebody's been referring to and has been getting really good feedback from his patients. So that becomes his physical therapist. First 2 weeks, didn't do much with the shoulder, worked on his neck, worked on his traps, worked on C5, I'm imagining, really just got posture and neck back in line. He's a physician. He's empathetic. He's leaning into his work. He's not trying to intimidate his patients, but there's a lot of tension that you accumulate there. Now, could he have avoided that rotator cuff surgery had he had the neck stuff done first? I don't know. But there is a huge shout out to his physical therapist that actually didn't treat him like a shoulder. She treated him like a human with a shoulder problem. And there's a lot of baggage there. And so she was actually working on the risk factors that were going to impede his rehabilitation later on. And I don't think she got paid any extra for, working on his neck than she did simply by following the range of motion and strength protocol of getting that shoulder back. But it is the people who are taking this wellness thing and doing it anyway. I'm not waiting for a mandate. I'm not waiting for rules and regulations. I am going to consider total health whenever I can. And sleep's in my wheelhouse, man. I'm a PT. I'm not a sleep expert, but I know what a minimum is, and I know what good enough is, and I know what functional sleep is and what dysfunctional sleep is. I know the exact same thing about breathing, nutrition, and exercise. And so putting that, going back full circle to what you said, putting that word function in front of something isn't a marketing ploy for me, and it never has been. Putting the word function in front of a screen instead of exercise makes a lot of sense, because a lot of people were using the term functional exercise as one of their chips. This is what we do here. But if your clients on scale aren't passing a fair movement screen, then you're calling it functional exercise, but you don't have a functional outcome. So we gotta meet the standards we set. And so I think the word function means what's good enough in this category. And I think a lot of times we get lost in the conversation of trying to optimize sleep, optimize nutrition, optimize your workout. I mean, you can't go anywhere on the internet without hearing about all these anti-inflammatory strategies and cold plunges and stuff. Where's all this damn inflammation coming from? These guys aren't triathletes.
And one of the things we looked at, talking about the state of wellness, is that right now it's very much a hot topic. Whether it comes from RFK Jr., the administration, or generally from wellness organizations, it's definitely a hot topic because we're so bad. Let's be honest, because we're so bad. However, we've got data that says we are dedicating more energy, more resources to improving this. and during that same time we increase these resources, our state of wellness has had inverted, has had the same type of decline.
Okay. And I just heard an amazing podcast with Ray Dalio, who wrote a book called Principles, and Bill Belichick, who just wrote a book called Winning, and they're friends. And one's a financial expert, and one's obviously a football expert. And it was amazing because Ray, right in the middle of that, just said, what's your goal? Number one, what's your goal? If your goal is improving wellness, then how do you measure it? Because if you don't measure it, it's not going to get done. So how do you measure wellness? And that's where you and I tried to come to. We've got to assign a score because everybody thought they were doing functional exercise back in the day, and we started doing a functional movement screen and stuff ain't functional.
Well, and that brings me to another stat I was going to bring up here is most people would argue they're measuring wellness. How is wellness measured in most typical scenarios? You can do a behavioral health questionnaire. You can get an idea of what your sleep is. I mean, crap, a lot of people run around now with wearables, and they're going to measure your wellness for the most part. So you can get that information. What is missing is movement.
It is.
Movement is the biggest thing missing because, okay, here's the stat I was going to bring up. So in that same research grade, or not research, just data that was presented on the National Guard, 70%, they have a mandatory, based off of this information, mandatory annual medical examination where all of these factors should be considered. 30% don't go in. So they're not mandated to go in. I mean, meaning they just blow it off. And there doesn't seem to be, based off what we're reading, any accountability.
That's right.
So there's ways to measure it, but they're missing one of the biggest factors, and that's movement and pain with movement. And I think that's where we're coming to the table and say, oh, listen, you got to consider all these. Because if your behavioral health is bad, if your sleep is bad, if you're overweight, well, movement could be an underlying driver for all of that, especially if it hurts.
Right. And so finding ways you can move that don't put you at greater risk and do help you manage your metabolism better is what this is all about. And I think you're right in that people think they're measuring movement. But if I only bring you one of my bank accounts and one of my tax statements, you don't have a full profile of my financial solvency.
Well, they
you
measure
just
physical
don't.
activity and say, okay, hey, you're exercising 5 days a week, you're fine. But they don't take into consideration that the person running 5K every day, back hurts, doesn't have good balance, and they're stressed out.
Yeah. 3,000 steps a day. Every one of them's with a limp and an anterior head and a forward bent posture. That's a different 3,000 steps than somebody who's walking upright, not limping, and has a, fully balanced, well-postured gait.
Well, and really the scariest statistic coming out of this thing is that what it says, and we talk about, really trying to make a change, and we're not winning that battle as it is right now. It's going to have to be a cultural shift. And I think that's where RFK take this stuff. We got to take the stuff out of the food. People aren't going to just stop eating crap. You got to start taking the stuff out of the food. But you're looking at right now, almost 33% of adolescents are at pre-diabetic. Pre-diabetic, 33% adolescents, which means they are going to pretty much be diabetics.
They got, if you meet the criteria for pre-diabetes at any age, there's an 80% chance you're going to be in type 2. Okay. So
of that 33%, 80% of those people will be diabetics.
So you want to talk about changing standards? There's one you should do, because we got to get further upstream and say, if you're pre-diabetic and do everything we say, you got an 80% chance of avoiding it, not an 80% chance of getting it. And that is the way we've got to start thinking about this. But I cannot stand to hear somebody talk about wellness as if everybody values it the same. Because once again, one of the things, the burr that got under my saddle was everybody thought they were doing functional stuff, including myself and you. And when we started measuring our outcomes, we realized we didn't always get an athlete functional after an injury. Or in the preseason, we assumed they were functional just because they looked pretty lean and, had muscles. And so our own hubris that we thought we could spot function and not have to measure it is the exact same thing I think most wellness professionals, well-intentioned as they are, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, how do you measure wellness? I wouldn't have said it as tight as I just said it now. How many risk factors do you not have? And obviously think that through, but if we can tally risk factors, and if there's a tipping point, I'll give you one that if either of our parents is hypertensive and they go for a medical physical and they are found to be hypertensive, they're put on hypertensive medication. And their hypertension numbers come back to hopefully within a normal slot once you get the medication adjusted. Their risk factors didn't change. And that's the way it says. If you're hypertensive or on medication for hypertension, your risk factors are the same. So even though the pharmaceutical that you're now taking made your numbers look better, your trajectory is the exact same because the lifestyle that made you hypertensive is still in play.
And I think, without just, again, being those two grumpy old men, I mean, I think now the fact that, one, the biggest thing is that we are shining a light on it. When I say we, society. Society knows, the president, RFK, whatever, forget politics, they are making this an issue, which is a positive. And I think there will be, again, it's got to take resources. It's going to take a lot of shifting, but we've got to start with making people become more aware about themselves. It has to be we talked about it, we touched on it. What do you need? I can't just say and have any impact to a group of individuals, hey, you need to sleep more, you need to drink more water, and you need to exercise. Okay, is that all I need to tell somebody? No, we got to dive a little bit deeper, and it has to start with finding out where they are. And that's in our wheelhouse. Screen yourself. There's ways you can screen yourself. Get a wearable, get something, and watch the gauges. But watch the gauges that matter the most to you and make sure that you're not decreasing or going backwards. Because, let's be honest, Gray, you're going to go up and down. I'm going to go and do something this weekend. It may not be smart. I may have a few too many drinks. I may tweak my ankle. I may do whatever. Next week, I've got to recover from that. But as long as I'm not going too far backwards, but as long as I know which gauges to keep an eye on, that's the first step.
Yep.
And I think that's what we've got to get the mentality of people starting to do. And I think we can do that. I think I'm a little bit more optimistic about where we can go. It's not going to happen overnight. It's got to be a cultural shift. It's got to start, Gray, in the school system.
You make a very strong point because when we truly found out how bad cigarettes are for you, we learned about it in health and PE class. And there was no campaign to make our parents quit smoking. They told school kids, and school kids came home and said, smoking's really bad for you, Mom. And they made an impact. Same thing with seatbelts. We told kids about seatbelts and parents started wearing them. We told kids about cigarettes and parents started wearing them. And I hate to say it, if you're an adult, get hypervigilant or you're lost because everybody's already focusing on the next generation. Now, you can get out of the hole or you can just follow the trajectory you're on. But the other thing is, whenever we're talking to people in a position of authority, I don't care if it's a fire chief or a clinic director or something like that, they do have a lot of excuses of why we can't do this or why this would be cost prohibitive. My whole thing is, yeah, but does that mean you're not going to do any of it? And the funny thing is, when some of the people who've followed our advice and done it, as soon as they hit a position of authority, they go ahead and say, all right, now I'm going to do it because nobody would listen to me when I didn't have rank. And the funny thing is, they distinguish themselves very quickly. Is it easy? No. But if you want to stand out in your field, you're going to have to do something different than everybody else who is completely convinced that policy and procedure is correct right now, because it ain't. It got us here.
Well, the first thing I'll say is go get yourself screened. You can go to our website, functionalmovement.com, click on the link in the show notes, get yourself screened, figure out where you are, and then start making some lifestyle changes and behavioral changes. We all need to do that, but just get a sense of where you are right now.
Yeah, and the conversation you have with yourself that causes a change will probably be the one you carry into your profession.
Thanks for joining us.
Yep.
If you want to learn more about today's podcast or dive deeper into functional movement systems information, check out some of the resources and offers we're providing in the description. That will do it for this episode of the Movement Podcast.
Thanks for listening, and if you liked what you heard, please take a minute and subscribe and review.
If you want to learn more about our system and take the next step in your own movement journey,
visit us at movementpod.com.
Until next time, be sure to first move well,
Then move often.